Hi, and welcome to Living Waters Wesleyan Church. I'm Pastor Kathy Eddy, and I'm going to bring the sermon to you today. I saw a video on Facebook the other day that had a young woman that had gone back into time from the beginning of this year, and she was trying to warn herself of the changes that were going to take place in her life just in this year. And it made me stop and contemplate, all the things that had changed. In January, I remember spending time planning, and I had a sermon plan that went over 6 months. And, for most of the part, it's obsolete because it didn't address any of the massive upheavals that we're experiencing in our lives at the moment. And I had a church calendar that was full, and it had all vibrant things and groups that were going to meet. And a lot of that has changed because we're now in our isolated bubbles and things have changed. And I was planning a holiday to Italy and Turkey in June. Well, that's not going to happen at the moment. And Andrew had this secure income, and now he's unemployed. And in fact, when you start looking at all the things that have changed in our lives just in this short period of time, it's massive. The way we shop, the way we live, the way we eat. There are no takeouts or restaurants open. The way we socialize, the way we work, everything has changed. Psychologists talk about the change curve as a way of demonstrating the way that different emotions take place as people go through the process of accepting changes that are in their lives. And this week I've spent a bit of time thinking about this change curve and also stories from the Bible where people have been going through lots of change. And there's quite a few different stories in the Bible that talk about this. But one of the really big ones is the Exodus from Egypt. And I actually want to spend a couple of weeks going over not just the change, but then also the lessons that God was teaching these people during this time, because I actually think that they've got a lot of lessons that they can teach us as well. But today I want to have a look at the change curve and look at what that looked like for the people of Israel, what that looked like for us, and what we can learn from it. As we go through life, we learn to accept life as the way that we experience as normal. And it doesn't matter whether your life looks different to my life. Your life is normal for you, and my life is normal for me at any given time. And when something changes, when something happens, it can happen because of a couple of different things. I can initiate the change. Somebody else can initiate a change that will have a direct effect on me. Or sometimes something just happens really big in life and it's completely out of everybody's control. But it's all still change. People can move house and it can be really exciting. But it's still change, and that can still be really stressful. But if somebody loses their jobs, it's not something that they would like. It's not something that we want. And you have to go through this process of readjusting and juggling. What is this new life going to look like for us? So let's have a look at this Israelite story from the Exodus as an example. And I'm not going to read lots of this today because it's just far too long, because I want to go through pretty much Exodus 1 to Exodus 10 today. But I would encourage you to have a read of it over some time. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for 430 years. That was their normal. That was 430 years where I had been born a slave, my parents had been born a slave, my grandparents had been born a slave, my great-grandparents had been born a slave. Being a slave is all that the Israelites knew at this time. So whether it's a good existence or a bad existence, that doesn't matter. It was their normal. So when Moses comes along and he says, hey, I've heard from God and he's going to free you all, well, there was a lot of mixed feelings. Some of them, they were really relieved that God had not forgotten them. But then there were others that they'd been living in denial. No, nothing's going to change. He's going to talk big and then he's going to go back out into the desert again and nothing else is ever going to change. Or how do we know how to live? I don't know how to live as a free person anymore. I'm a slave. I've been a slave all my life. I don't know how to do this. I'm just not sure that we could win a war against the Egyptians. You know, they are really, really strong. And even Moses, he finds these changes difficult. He has just spent 40 years in the desert tending to his father-in-law's sheep. He may have grown up as a prince of Egypt, but he wasn't that anymore. Now, he was a shepherd from Moab. In fact, when God tells him, go and tell the Israelites that they're going to be freed, Moses felt his own sense of denial, which is often the very first step that we have in our curve to acceptance. And the first thing he says is, what if they don't listen to me? You know, at the beginning of this year, we all started hearing about this COVID-19 virus. And I think we all went through our own sense of denial to a little bit. People wondered, you know, how bad is this really? Isn't this just the news sensationalizing everything in the way that they do? Or maybe they went, yeah, that's really bad, but it's happening in China. That's not really going to affect us here in New Zealand. Or then there was talk about social isolation keep coming through. Okay, so you want me to stay away from crowded places, and that music festival that I wanted to go to, it can't be on now. Oh, you what? You want me to stay in my house for 4 weeks? No, they would never ask that of us. And yet, as we move through this time of denial, we often head into anger, which is the second part of this change curve. And during this time, we find that people start blaming others for their problems as well as blaming themselves. They might feel things like anger, confusion, depression, or dread. And again, we see this happening in the story of Egypt. Moses and Aaron went to see Pharaoh and they said, hey, Pharaoh, you have to let the Israelites go so they can go and worship God in the wilderness. And Pharaoh replied, Moses and Aaron, what? Why are you distracting these people from their tasks? Get back to work. Look, there are many people of your land and you are stopping them from work. Rather than letting the people go, Pharaoh decided to increase their workload. So they had to produce the same number of bricks as they did before, but rather than the straw being given to them and then they're having to make the bricks out of mud and straw like they had before, they actually had to go and get their own straw, bring it back, make the bricks, but still have the same number of bricks being made. Effectively, he doubled their workload and demanded the same number of bricks. And the people were angry. But who did they blame? Moses. Exodus 5 verse 20 says, the foreman said to them, this is to Moses and Aaron, may the Lord judge and punish you for making us stink before the Pharaoh and his officials. You have put a sword into their hands and given them an excuse to kill us. Hey Moses, what are you trying to do? Trying to save us? You've just made everything bucket loads worse. Think about this one for a moment. Here is Moses, way out of his comfort zone, doing all that God had told him to do. God said to him, go rescue the people from slavery. This is what I want you to do. Now, you wouldn't be, I've just left my flocks, brought my wife and my child all the way to Egypt from Moab. I've done all this for you. I've fronted up to Pharaoh for you. And are you thanking me? No, you're angry at me. And in fact, you're calling on God to come and judge me for causing all this problem. The people blamed Moses. Well, Moses, he blamed God. Listen to what he said. In Exodus 5 verse 21, he said, then Moses went back to the Lord and protested. Why have you brought all this trouble on your people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh as your spokesman, he's been even more brutal to the people. And you have done nothing to rescue them. Change is stressful. And when we have feelings of confusion and depression and dread cascading through our bodies, it often comes out as anger. What is all that churned up feeling inside comes out as anger. And we blame somebody else. We blame anybody else. Or sometimes we blame ourselves. And even when change is good, even when I'm moving into a new house or I'm starting a new job, it's still stressful. And these feelings of anger and confusion can still occur. At the moment, each of us have been through a huge change. Everything about normal life has changed. And if you are feeling confused or depressed or angry at the moment, I want to tell you that is normal. This is a normal part of coming from a new reality and learning to accept your new reality. And if your partner is maybe a little more snappy than they might normally be, well, that's normal too. Now, I'm not saying that this is an excuse to let our bad tempers get the best of us, but we do need to acknowledge that during these stressful times that we're under, and maybe practice a little bit extra grace and forgiveness and understanding to those that are around us. If you're feeling all churned up, I can guarantee that all the other people in your house are feeling churned up as well. Somewhere in the midst of all these churned up feelings and in the midst of all this anger and depression and confusion, things start to change. The people of Israel saw this. And for the people of Israel, it was when God started sending these plagues upon the Egyptians. And they realized that rather than God and Moses making things worse for them, they were actually trying to make them better. So when Moses says to them, I want you to prepare this Passover meal, and you have to take the blood of a lamb and paint it on your doorways, they do what they've been told, because they have come to realize that God's way is better and that we actually want that change. We don't want to stay here as slaves. We are sick of looking back in the past. It's time for us to look forward to the new future, to that future that Moses is painting for them, and going, yes, we can step out into that. But it's taken 9 plagues and a lot of time for this realization to come. I want you to have a look at that cycle in front of you and decide where you are at the moment. One of the things I've observed as I've been talking to lots of people this week is that people are in really different stages. At the beginning of all this, everybody I spoke to went, yes, I'm fine, we can do this, this is good, a bit of time to myself, it's great. It's changed a little bit over the last week. There are still some people that are feeling just that way. It's great being able to have all this time at home. It's great not having to jump out of bed early. It's great being able to read. But for others, it's beginning to take a significant toll on them. And I hear people saying things like, it's getting really lonely. Or I just don't know what's the matter with me. I feel so out of sorts. And I get that. Earlier this week, I had 2 days where I just felt really isolated and really withdrawn. And I wanted to make a couple of comments about this change, because I've actually started coming through that and started going up again. And so can you. So here's my first comment. Wherever you are in this cycle of acceptance, change acceptance at the moment is okay. There is no right or wrong about how you're feeling. We don't go through this process all at the same rate. Some of you are going to be in that angry and frustrated stage, and that's okay. You're going to come through this. Don't blame yourself for not being further on and not being able to accept it all like you think you should. For some of you, you might have gone, well, I'm actually doing okay. I'm accepting this change. I have no problem with this whatsoever. That's great. And I'm going to say to you, just be really careful not to judge those that are still going through it. Don't think just because it was easy for you that it was going to be easy for all of them as well. And some of you may have found, Kathy, I'm bouncing a little bit. I come through and I started accepting it, and then I bounce back and I'm going through anger and frustration all over again. But you know what? This curve isn't necessarily a linear thing where it just keeps going up. Often people double back. And as we continue to look at the Israelites' story, when they left Egypt after the 10 plagues, they were on top of the world. But then they doubled back and they wanted to keep going back. And don't be disheartened if you are going up and then suddenly you have a really bad day again. That's normal. It's normal for this to happen to people. But you know, as Christians, one of the most important things that we can do is how do we respond in a helpful way to people regardless of where they are on this change curve. So here are a couple of tips, and it's going to depend on where the people that you're dealing with are on the change curve. If they're at that beginning of the curve, if they're still in denial or still needing support, my first word of advice is to you, pray. Pray for them, pray with them. But then listen. Don't give them advice. Don't tell them how to fix themselves. Don't tell them what they need to do. Just listen. They need to be able to go through this process. It is not something that somebody else can fix for you. If you're with somebody who has hit that angry stage, they're feeling confused and angry and just don't know what to do with themselves, pray. Pray for them. Pray with them. Listen to them. Let them express their anger. Don't belittle it or go, hey, it's really not that bad. Let them talk. Because maybe for them at this stage, it really is that bad. Again, don't try and advise them. Don't try and fix things for them. Just be there and listen to them as they go through it. When they start coming up into that change acceptance curve and they get to that exploring phase, then do you know what the first thing I want you to do is? I want you to pray. Pray for them. Pray with them. And then you can give them some support during this time. Discuss the ideas of what they're going to have. How is this new reality going to look in their life? What can they do? How are they going to do it? It's not me giving you all the answers. But you know, sometimes we all need to have just somebody to bounce some ideas off. Be that person for them. But never forget this. Regardless of where you are in that curve, God is with you. He has not left you. And even when it's really hard, He is still there. Sometimes it is those very hard things that help His will come to pass. If God had not sent those plagues, would Pharaoh have ever let the people of Israel go? If God had not sent those plagues, would the people of Israel ever learnt to trust Him? And see, this mighty God who is so powerful is in our corner. It was a tough time, but God's got lessons to teach you there. You know, there's a poem that's called God Knows that was written by Minnie Haskins, who was a missionary in India. And in part, it says this: I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown. And he replied, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That will be a better light to you than light. and are safer than a known way. You know, regardless of where you are on this change curve, whether you're in denial, whether you're angry, whether you're starting to work it through and accept things, or whether you are to the stage where, hey, this is lovely, I love this life. Wherever you are on that curve, place your hand in the hand of God and let him guide you through. Let's pray. Our loving Father, we just thank you that you are a God who guides us through. And you are a God who knows each one of us intimately. And you know everything that is going on inside of me right now. And everything that is going on inside of the person that is listening. Lord, help us to be honest with you about how we're feeling. Lord, for those of us that feel anxious and confused, I pray that you will give them your peace. For those that are angry and just can't quite catch hold of everything, I pray that you will just calm us. For those of us that are working out new ways and new habits and new patterns, Lord, my prayer is that you will just show us your ways. Provide us with people that we can bounce ideas off. Give us sound counsel. Lord, for those of us that are doing well, we just thank you and praise your name. Lord, for those that are lonely, may somebody reach out with a loving hand towards them right now. And Lord, we thank you that wherever we are in this curve, that you are there with us. Amen.